This season of So You Want to Run a Restaurant is brought to you by Localizer.
In today's market, the difference between a full house and an empty one is discoverability. And Localizer makes sure your restaurant actually gets found.
Yeah, by making it easy to manage all your online reviews, you'll boost your ranking on Google, Yelp, and even the top delivery apps. And more visibility means more customers walking through your door.
Turn your great reputation into real growth. And as an added bonus, listeners of this show get a 25% off discount on your first 3 months.
Learn how at localizer.com/podcast. That's LOCALYSER.com/podcast.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia Sarek.
And I'm Spencer Michael.
And this is So You Want to Run a Restaurant, created by the team at backofhouse.io, the most trusted resource for restaurant tech. Today's guest has one of those career journeys that you don't always come across often.
And fun fact about today, our guest today was once my boss's boss's boss. It was somehow I was down here and he was up here, and there was a level of management in between, but we worked together. Yes.
What a twist of fate.
Yes. Jessa is our guest today. He spent over 3 decades at Earls Restaurants, which are, for those of you who don't know, is a Canada-based restaurant chain founded in the 1980s in Alberta. Moved through Western Canada, then all across the East, and then down to the United States. So he's helped grow a small family-run chain of about 13 or so locations when he started, to now about 70 spots across all North America.
It just exploded. And Mo was the first non-family member to serve as president of the restaurant chain. So under his leadership, Earls really reinvented itself for a new generation of diners, doubled its profitability, and became really a benchmark in the industry for a lot of team culture and performance metrics.
Yeah, it's super impressive. And what really stands out about Mo, and I was able to live this firsthand, is the way he led a people-first approach and a deep commitment to mentorship, culture, and team leadership development.
I am super into this story because Mo's journey is not just about scaling a restaurant brand, which he did super well, is a great teacher in that aspect. But as you said, really about the leadership and the vision that made that growth possible, and his mindset around leadership, which has really served him well.
Yeah, I'm excited to jump into this. Mo, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Spencer.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure, actually.
Thanks for joining us today, Mo. I'm so excited to have you on the show. So, Mo, you joined Earls back in the late 80s as a restaurant chef. And did you ever imagine then that you'd one day be leading the entire company?
Oh, my God, no. No. It was never part of the plan.
Yeah. Those are the best stories, though, right?
Yeah. I guess if you want to hear the story, I mean, it's a strange one because I graduated from high school at the top of my class. And in my South Asian heritage, if you graduate anything like that, then you're either going to become a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or an engineer or a loser. And so, I went to university, and what I love telling all the cooks that are going to listen to this show is that this whole career caught me by surprise because I went to university and didn't do that well. And imagine graduating at the top of your class in high school and then going to university, and my GPA was 2.4 after two years, and I dreams of becoming a medical doctor and having the perfect life and all of that. I was basically in an existential crisis. I didn't know if I wasn't smart what kind of a kid I was,
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure it out, but mostly what I ended up realizing from what was happening to me well after was that high school was just too easy for me. I was a couple of grades ahead when I moved to Canada from East Africa, where we were in a British system, and so my grades were easy because I just found school easy. But I never learned how to work hard. I never knew how to study, and I didn't even know how to ask for help. To be honest with you, I was so embarrassed about my grades. I didn't even ask for help, so they just kept getting worse and worse.
Yeah. Did you start in a STEM career or a STEM background?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I loved the sciences, don't get me wrong. And when I knew that I was passionate about learning, but I just couldn't get the grades. And it was in that state that I showed up at Earls. It's asking for a job only so I could earn some part-time income. If I could get full-time, then I would go and buy myself a car because I had my my boys, the people that I was hanging out with, my friends still loved me, and we were going to
Sure.
go party our, next 5 years out and figure out what was going to happen, maybe become entrepreneurs or open up a business or something, but honestly lost. Like we had no idea what we were doing. And then the beauty about it was Earls at the time in 1988 was a pretty inspired company. I mean, I had no idea what I just got myself into. And the people that started training me on even the basic level of cooking were more interested in making me love food and the industry than I was.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the drop the mic moment. Like I remember getting very interested about just the basics of cooking, and I didn't want to fail at something. That was probably the motivator because I was already failing at school. So, I started, really earnestly trying to do well. And one of my chefs actually brought me a book called On Cooking, and I started reading about the history of cooking and Antoine Carême and Escoffier and the Brigade and the mother sauces and the science behind cooking. There's a ton of science in cooking. And then I would come to work and I would be talking to the rest of the prep cooks about, hey, I read this. You can't, if you add a little bit of acid to broccoli and it keeps the broccoli green. Did you know that? And people would get excited that I was bringing that kind of information. And my sous chef at the time just saw it and said, wow, you know what? I love that you're so interested. I think for the next team member that comes in, I'm going to get you to train them on the station instead of me. And when I started
Where was
teaching,
this? Was this in BC or?
no, this is actually in my first restaurant was in Forest Lawn in Calgary. That restaurant isn't even around anymore, but it's in Calgary. And
Okay.
yeah, and as soon as the sous chef said you have to teach someone, and I remember doing my first training session and getting somebody else to light up on the knowledge that I was teaching them, I realized that was something that I wanted to do for a long time. It was just
That's
so
awesome.
satisfying to teach someone else to do something that I knew how to do and watch them succeed at it. I guess if I wasn't, I hadn't become the president of Earls Restaurants, I think I would have become a teacher because I think that's the thing that I love the most.
Your career's a windy journey, man.
Yeah.
Now, were you part of the group that went traveling to just discover new? Because I remember opening up my Earl's recipe book when I was a cook there and talking about, I can't remember what date it was that we went over to Italy and we toured around and we went sample different.
wow.
And of course, me being at 6:30 in the morning getting ready for my prep shift, thinking, oh, must be nice. Sounds
Yeah.
like a good time to join the company. Were you part of that group, or was that predate you, or were you there for that?
I was definitely part of it,
Nice.
Spencer. And that's when I say this was an inspired company. Imagine the owners used to believe that to inspire their people to do great work, they had to invest in them. And one of the ways to do it is to show them, experience of food and culture and stuff like that all over the world. And so I remember my first trip was in Italy. It was actually, went to Oktoberfest. And then we went along the river Rhine and experienced all kinds of like wines and food, and eventually ended up going to Italy at least 5 or 6 times for Earls. Singapore, I've gone to France several times, and the trips that became so. I remember in Earls, like you said, Spencer, they were considered one of the highlights of working there, because when you became a chef or a restaurant manager, you got to go on these like culture trips, and they were some of the favorite memories I have of working at Earls, is just those trips, because not only do you learn, but the gathering of those people that were so inspired, hanging out with them, and just spending all that time getting to see the world. It's unforgettable.
Yeah, it's the experiences.
And it trickled down for those of us who didn't get to go on the trip. So it's still, I vividly remember my first day cooking at Earl's. And I think you'd started. Did you start in dish? Because everybody starts in dishwasher.
Everybody starts in the dish.
You do your 2 weeks. So I think I did 3 weeks. Maybe you're there for a month. It's being explained to me that you just got chosen for the rep team. You're like for sports analogy, you just got chosen for the travel team. This is not amateur hour. So you got to start here because this is the tryout. And I tell this to my dishwashers that when I became a manager later about it, it's like, we're not going to teach, there's not a ton of skills that you need to learn. It's not very technical. It's just hard work. That's all it is. So are you going to be able to do it? So I got out of that, and I vividly remember my first day cooking. I'm cutting red peppers for the Hunan Kung Pao, which is still in the menu, been there for decades. And 10 minutes in, the chef comes by and goes, what are you doing? And oh my goodness. And he goes, the recipe says half-inch diced. You are closer to quarter-inch diced on these. And it wasn't yelling and screaming, wasn't Gordon Ramsay. He was very respectful, but it was like, there's a standard and you're 10 minutes in and you're not hitting it. Let me show you how to do it properly. And it was an eye opener for me because everything was made fresh there. But I guess, I mean, those, you have to invest in your people to get all of that passion to trickle down to teaching a guy how to cut a red pepper in one of your 60 restaurants. So how does Earls maintain that? How did you maintain that structure?
Catering orders can get messy, forms, phone calls, and way too many mistakes. But Rally Catering by App 8 makes it easy. Guests order online with 0 errors, saving your team time and allowing you to capture more business with higher margins. Less stress, fewer mistakes, and more revenue means catering finally works the way it should. And right now, listeners of this show get 30% off their monthly subscription. Head to app8solutions.com to learn more.
I think that's the secret sauce, honestly. If people say, well, you know, they're so interested in what Earls was successful, and one of the key ingredients, well, the 2 first ingredients were this kind of entrepreneurial spirit. You know, it's like we used to say to people that came to Earls, or they still do now, is that you learn a philosophy called "It's Your Business," and "It's Your Business" is when you come here, you're accountable to do the best you can and then solve problems just like it was your own business. And man, did we love that. Imagine like a young kid being told, like, I'm going to give you the keys to make sure that this works and it runs or whatever. I'll tell you a story. Like, I was a dishwasher just like you were. I remember the dishwasher stopped working. And I walked up to the line and I said to the sous chef, hey, the dishwasher stopped working. And he said, it's your business. What are you going to do about it? I said, well, I'm telling you. But what else am I supposed to do? And he goes, no, what if it was your business? What would you do? And I kind of looked at him. You want me to call, like, a repairman? And back then we had yellow pages. And he goes, yeah, the yellow pages are in the office. And I remember actually walking back to the office and just thinking, wow, like I'm actually like in charge of solving this whole thing. It was like, I can't tell you how odd it was. But at the same time, once I started doing it, it was like, remember calling the guy. I remember actually getting someone there. I remember getting it fixed. I remember how that translated into a big sous chef that had run out of product and had the imagination to say, well, my job's to solve the problem, and how I actually solved it by calling the right supplier to get the product in so that my customers would have it. Like, the sense of ownership was that was like bred in us. It's like you own not only the job, but you own the solutions to all of it, and you get to run things. And so that was really amazing. But then this other side was, you know, in 88, we were still only a burger place with maybe some draft beer and some, you know, a couple of stir fries and stuff like that. This is not a Michelin star place or whatever, right? And so what Spencer's pointing to is that if we came to work, the guy that I think we don't honor as much and talk about his name was Chief Chef Chuck Curry. And what Chief Chef Chuck taught us is, you even came to work with like shiny shoes. If your chef jacket wasn't ironed, there was an iron in the back. And if you came and stood online at your prep station and there wasn't a perfect army crease on it, he would actually point it out and he would say, go iron it again. You know, because the idea was that we had to have impeccable standards, you know, high standards. We were not burger flippers. We wore our hats. We looked good. We shined our shoes. And then when we learned knife skills or precision of cutting and all that, even in 88, we were using digital scales to measure everything. And half-inch red pepper was actually measured on a ruler. And the specs were like so tight that, you know, everybody would not only make it a certain way, but the checkpoints to make sure it was made a certain way were also backed up. And even to this day, Spencer, you're right. You know, I walk into restaurants even after Earls, and it still shocks me that you would think after all of this knowledge that we've created at Earls and how people do it, and it's all over YouTube and all these restaurants, that people still don't really follow those basics of precision, having tight specs, consistency. Because really, without that, it's very hard to run a restaurant company which can produce consistently great food.
Well, I guess that's a good question then, or that leads me into my next question, which is, I can see why it would be, it's a leadership style that the restaurant and the business and everyone there that's embodying, which is, we're not just going to lead, we're going to bring people along with us, we're going to teach along the way, we're going to empower people so they feel like they're a part of this. But how do you maintain that when you keep growing the company? Because I read that you started at what, 7 restaurants? There was only 7 restaurants when you joined, and then you grew it to 70. That's a
Yeah.
huge jump. How do you take and how does that leadership style, how do you maintain that style through that growth? Want to save more than 12 hours a week by automating hiring, onboarding, scheduling, time tracking, payroll, and reporting? Imagine eliminating paperwork with built-in compliance and document tracking. It might sound too good to be true, but Push Operations makes all of this and more possible in one easy-to-use platform. Visit www.pushoperations.com and mention Back of House in your demo to get 20% off a new subscription.
Very insightful question, Claudia, because you're right. Entrepreneurial nature, competitiveness, it takes you far because people want to grow and progress in that kind of a culture. And so
Right.
the way Bus Fuller and Stan Fuller used to always talk about is our impediments to growth are not going to be money or locations. They're just going to be people. Now, 99% of the people that, become chefs or restaurant managers at Earls all start off as dishwashers and servers. So the idea was that, the people development had to become articulate, like more and more articulate. And, that was another talent that Chuck had brought, is like a very strong people development culture. And we knew how to take someone from the pipeline of, pool of dishwashers and then put you into a systematic process that would get you to be a chef. We knew exactly what you had to learn. The problem was that it can be slow, and how many people actually make it through that pipeline limits your growth. And so by the time I became an executive chef in 2000 and then a vice president of operations by 2005, that became the area that I had to focus on, is how do we develop people faster and what systems can we put in to actually grow people at a rate that's faster than the system that was already there, in order to get from like 7 to 13 to then 35 and to 60 and so on, And I would have to say leadership training became an obsession of mine. I still think today it's something that I think about every day, about how to spread the knowledge of everything that I learned about leadership. And what we focused on is how to get people to absorb the knowledge and do it in a way that was absorbed faster. When they had breakdowns, they could actually overcome those breakdowns faster, and that there was clarity in everything that they were doing, so that the processing of all that information happened faster and they were able to deal with it. And so I can talk more about that, but honestly, leadership development at Earls has probably become the one thing that it's a company's asset. It's like more than a recipe or a location or SOP or checklist or whatever. How we develop leaders is one of the most critical things that made us successful.
It must have been hard to resist the temptation to buy a pre-made product or to give your recipes. A lot of times, those give your recipes off to a food distributor that they could find someone to make it en masse and then ship that recipe out. You avoided all that. I remember telling people all the time, like, no, we make everything in-house at Earls. At that point, I think I worked there. There were probably 40, 50 locations. Like, there's no way. I mean, we make the chicken stock. We make the barbecue sauce. We make the Alfredo sauce. Everything comes in raw goods, and we create it all. And I was the baker. And I was making all the desserts for the 700,000 people that were going to be coming in that week.
Were you like Spencer? No, trust me, I'm knee deep in flour every day. I make everything,
among other things too. Because I mean, there's 5 desserts on the menu, so the baking was a part of it. I had to help out with the sauces and everything too. But I vividly remember. So I'm doing story time here, and it's Mo's show. I apologize.
No, that's so good.
You might remember this. When the saucier would make fresh demi-glace, and I was the baker, I was in charge of making the garlic mashed potatoes. And when the days would sync up that we're making those fresh on the same day, it was stop everything, because everybody's taking a scoop of mashed potatoes and pouring some fresh demi right out of the pot, and we're eating this. And there's no way that anybody's getting away not doing this. Yeah. But there had to be a temptation at one point to say, we can get demi-glace from somewhere else. We could probably get some mashed potato. We could cut some corners somewhere, but you say, no, we're committing to the people that are creating this. And is that kind of where, was it ever discussed at any point to move away from it?
100%, because to grow and be consistent across the countries, we had Asian products, for example, that weren't even available in some U.S. cities that we're opening up in. Like, how do we actually keep this whole thing going and be consistent or whatever? And so one of the rules became that if the task did not require human ingenuity, specialty, something that was actually sophisticated, that you could see that a human added value to this, then it was okay to look at possibilities of outsourcing. So yes, there was a time when we used to like cut everything in house, but then at some point we did realize that it's okay to get some pre-cut vegetables because they are, just the way they're actually cut and the way they're processed and the safety that comes along with the way that they're actually handled makes us a better restaurant company. Knife skills important? Yeah. So let's use knife skills to do the kind of, julienne or brunoise or that the guest notices. Let's not do the bulk stuff, but if you can actually make something that makes it look refined, make a sauce or a baked good that the guest says, oh my God, that does taste like freshly baked pie that was made right here in the restaurant. And so we still do them. We bake all kinds of pies, and it was such a nice thing to see a banana cream pie that they launched as a seasonal dessert do so well, because you think these are typical, but when something is made with love inside and hands go into doing it well, it does taste different than something that you can get from outside that's just processed without that kind of thought put into it. But yeah, the pressure was there, but I think we found a nice angle to it. We basically said, it was anything that was considered donkey work, like just repetitive and not value add, let's take it out of the kitchen and focus the chef's capabilities to just to do the kind of work that adds super good value. And I think the chefs appreciated that too, because they learned more intricate skills, and then they actually had to refine it. And then of course, there are some culinary techniques that we just did not want to give up on. In other words, if you're going to work in a kitchen that is, we still train Red Seal chefs in our kitchens. There are critical skills that you need to learn when you're actually in one of our kitchens, and so regardless of what kind of skill is, if it included knife skills, a certain kind of cuts that you have to learn, certain sauces you have to make, we will preserve some so that they actually maintain that skill in our repertoire. And that's how we've tried to stay true to it.
It sounds like your whole team was really thinking about this holistically, and it shows because your team was sticking around. It sounds like they were growing through the organization, and your customer base was growing, and these locations were growing. And so I guess I want to talk a little bit about the expansion into the international expansion, because I know you've built this great successful restaurant in Canada, and now you're going to try to break into the US market, which is, notoriously incredibly tough for restaurants to do, and was a big milestone. What were some of those key lessons that you learned along the way that helped supported that decision and made that move successful?
Yeah, great question, Claudia, because there were some big lessons. In fact, if you actually try to do search and see how many Canadian restaurant companies have successfully expanded into the U.S. Well, actually do the other one too. So how many U.S. Restaurant companies have done well in Canada? You'll see that there's actually a challenge that is a blind spot for people. Like it doesn't automatically work. Even some great, very successful, let's say, coffee shops that do well in Canada don't seem to be able to get their full traction in the US, and they're still trying as hard as anyone with all the sophistication that they have, right? And so yeah, we were obsessed with what this blind spot was and how to make sure that we uncover it. I would say if I was going to give 3 reasons why Earls is successful in international markets is, first, we realized that we couldn't just dip our toe in. Now, what I mean by that is you can't just say, well, let's just go try it out and see what happens, and we'll learn as we go, like kind of thing. And we'll add people when it's successful, or we'll invest more, and that definitely doesn't work. If you're going to commit to a market, it's like jumping in the pool. You're jumping all in. And so what we ended up doing is investing in the kind of like taking some of the best talent that we had in Canada, convincing them that we were going to look after them, and that there was a payoff for going in and doing these opening of these new markets in the U.S. Not only pay them well and pay for them, but allow them enough time, sometimes 6, 7, 8 months ahead of time. I even sent, when our first location opened in Miami, a year in advance, the manager would go out there, and we would basically say, get to know Miami like the way you know your own city or town, in the sense that, like, how do people move around there? What do they like? How do people enjoy the city? What makes the city move? Eat out at different restaurants and see where people are hanging out and what they're talking about. And so it was a no dip your toe, like jump in, and we're going to be successful no matter what, because we're going to get to know the market. I think the second...
Totally immerse yourself in
totally
it is what
immerse.
it sounds like, yeah.
totally immersed. And, and then the second thing that we did was we got to learn what the mindset of the guest was. Like I'd learned this from Lululemon because what they used to do is they would go into a market and they would just open up a pop-up, right? And then they would bring a bunch of yogis or whatever, and they would go to the yoga studios. They would just talk to people and find out what was kind of the in-depth understanding of what their culture was like. And the one main thing that we learned, even going to Miami, for example, is our instincts was if we're going to open up in Miami, we got to have cachaça because, we're going to have some Brazilian cocktails, and we're going to have, it's a cocktail culture. So we're going to have all of these different items on there. And, they have these, prawns that they love. So we're going to have to put prawns on our menu. And then what about, honestly, the biggest insight we got from the pull to do a Cubano sandwich and a prawn curry or prawn dish or whatever is that the people in the Miami said, if you're going to come to Miami, don't pretend to be like us. You're coming to Canada, from Canada, you know what you're famous for, and you have your best. Bring your best to us, and we will come and celebrate that, rather than you pretending that you know how to make our cuisine better than we can. Imagine that.
Yeah, that's an interesting balance.
You would never guess that. It allowed us to just stay really focused that, hey, Earls works in Canada, and let's do the best version of Earls in Miami, not a version that we think that will be for Miami. In other words, never lose your soul. If we're known for the best burger, let's make the best burger and stick to it, not the ones that we think that our competitors are doing might be all that. And I think that that's paid off in a lot of ways. I think what guests appreciate is authenticity, like we know what we do well and we're sticking to it, and then they want to come in and share in that, right? And I think the third one, I think the insight was when you go to America, for example, don't be a Canadian in America. You actually have to become an American. In other words, I don't know how to explain it other than even just some examples I can give you is that, restaurant business in Miami is very different than Calgary, Alberta. And in the sense that who works there, the number of Spanish people, for example, that were in our kitchens is completely different than you would have in Calgary. The management style and what they're used to about the way the managers actually deal with the employees, the language, the expectations is different than the ones that we have in Calgary than we have in Miami or whatever. Now, we saw an opportunity of how to become a restaurant company that changes the way people feel about how they come to work and all of that. But the directness with which we were supposed to speak, the amount of instruction that we're supposed to give, a little bit of the holding accountable systems that we had to put in place was a lot different. And so I think we became a better restaurant company by just learning how to be a good restaurant company in the US, and it actually helped Canada too, but not pretend that you're not going to have to get to know the innate culture of how people operate, what their nuances are, the way they use language, the way they have their own understanding of employer staff relationship that's different. And so we really, I guess it goes right back to that immersion. Like we just understood more of what we wanted, and I think that's what it takes. I think if you take it for granted that you understand where you're walking into, and you don't do that deep dive, I think it can sway you into making mistakes that you can prevent if you do it the way we
Well,
figured
also
out.
going into a spot and immersing yourself is also a reflection tool, I think. And it sounds like that's what you're saying here is that going into these spaces and expanding and really diving in here, it makes you deeply reflect too of like my own business and what we're doing elsewhere. And so it sounds like it had a bigger impact than just a lot of the little nuances, but it sounded like there was a bigger picture there too.
Totally, because if you think about it, we just opened up a restaurant in King Street West, a gritty neighborhood in Toronto. We already have a restaurant in the financial district, but we didn't take it lightly. King Street West is not King Street Financial District. So let's go in there. And this is a neighborhood that we anticipate is not going to like a chain because it's full of independents right now. We're going to build an Earls here. Why would they want an Earls in King Street West? And what is going to make them feel like it belongs here? And why, it's going to actually be a great addition to this neighborhood. To try to figure out that insight, you have to spend a lot of time talking to people in this area, people that live in this area, people that come in to the area for different occasions and things like that. And when I saw King Street West sales numbers and how unbelievably successfully it opened and how it welcomed it was in that neighborhood, I realized, our formula of getting to know the guest and doing the right thing for the guest, it just made us make decisions that were just that much smarter. And you're actually solving the issue that your neighborhood wants. And then they appreciate it because they know that you actually listen to them and you're putting together a product that actually does meet their expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So as Earls changes and expands, it still stays the same, which I enjoy. I still go there. My parents still go there. You have to ask anybody, or if you tell anybody you worked at Earls, there's probably like a 25% chance that they come back with like, oh, I worked at Earls too. It is well ingrained in the Canadian culture, but if, and I love how I go there and there's different things in the menu. There's a new energy to certain things. There's new cocktails. The service standards, I know we talked a lot about the back of house. The service standards are always so professional as well. I don't want to forget about the front of house. But what's the hardest part about balancing kind of those legacy guests? Like I want the Hunan Kung Pao chicken when I go in there, or I want the Cajun chicken with that warm potato salad that is so good, that won't move, or that won't change, hopefully ever. But you also have a new generation of diners. So how does that balance out when you're looking at new areas to grow, but also within the menu and within the style, you will look for areas to grow as well?
Oh, that's super good question, Spencer. Only because honestly, it's one of the toughest things to figure out. I mean, imagine this, like think about, quick service restaurant companies, they've added cafe sections, they've added a pizza, had to take it out. They've had, and so how do you do that? How do you keep your existing restaurant relevant to the new generation, but don't lose as many as you have from the old generation and still remain successful and all of that? And that is not easy to do. I think, Earls had to make a lot of mistakes to try to figure this out. Don't just change for the sake of change, And so once we realized that we had to, go back to understanding what the guest profile was changing, generally what people were either eating healthier or looking for certain items on the menu, or there was some diversity that we could bring to the menu. We just applied a lot of rigor. I think what makes it work though, Spencer, is that whatever we do, we don't try to half-ass it. It's like if we're going to do something, whether even making sushi, let's go in and learn, actually bring in sushi chefs, understand how to make a really, really great product so that it actually enhances whatever we've learned from that culture, whatever we've learned from the techniques of that place, and then be able to invest in a way that actually makes that a real showpiece when we actually present it to the customer. But then there's a discipline. The discipline is if the guest, ultimately on any new product, if the guest doesn't like it or show support around it, then we actually take it off. We don't do that. And so eventually what we realized is that, and that's I think why we built a test kitchen in Vancouver, is that everything we do has to be tested. The guest is the final arbiter of whether we're making the right change to the menu or not. And we don't have a bunch of people at Earls that just fall in love with stuff and say, let's just put this on or that on. Ideas are welcome, but in the end, what speaks is what shows up at the table. And when we do it right, people love the stuff that we put on, and we either bring it seasonally or it eventually becomes a menu item, but it's a healthy balance. Now, is Earls ever not going to be able to have some of its legacy items like the Caesar salad or the clam chowder or the burger or whatever? I mean, I honestly, and we've tried, by the way, we even try to change the Hunan. There's some things that you just can't make better or different. You know what I mean?
You just gave Spencer a mini heart attack.
I'll just, yeah. Well, I've made enough of them. I could probably whip it up at home fairly accurately. I've made enough of them over my time, but yeah.
But that was a hard lesson to learn, Spencer. I remember changing the Hunan and having to read hundreds of letters from customers going, "What are you doing?
What did you do to my day?
What did you do?"
Nope.
Yeah. And but making those mistakes, I would have to say the product that you put on has to have as much appeal as the one that you're trying to take off. And if it doesn't meet that standard, it can't replace it. And so it's been a real challenge for my culinary development team that we used to have there, but man, were they unbelievable. They came up with some amazing items, amazing dishes. The Santa Fe salad that is still around today, Chris Remington and Kim Hergy dreamt it up, and they put it on the menu. And you know what? Honestly, it was an instant hit. People just loved it. And so then it was okay for us to actually say, there's an item that'll actually work for us. And even now, they still work on the menu every day. We used to have a system in Earls that every Friday, the president and a group of small people on the taste panel go in and see what possible new items we can come up with. Because what Earls is also an innovation company. It's constantly changing. And I think the reason why we're still relevant 40 years in our history is because we just won't give up. We know trends change. We know guest profile are changing. And we will do our best to make sure that we stay as relevant as possible.
Well, that's a good place for me to ask one of our last questions here, which is, knowing everything you know about restaurants and Earls and your incredible experience growing up in this restaurant and being part of this restaurant, where do you see the industry headed in the next 5 to 10 years? We love to ask our guests this. Or if there's one thing about the industry that you think restaurateurs should really have their eyes set on, what do you think that is?
Well, I think the industry, as much as AI, automation, all of the scary words that people are using about whether, people will need restaurants, to me, it's so obvious. Honestly, what human beings are craving is a place to go connect, a place which
I
just makes
absolutely
it
agree.
right. So I think the first thing insight that everybody has to have is that make your place a great place for people to come in and hang out. And so I think the people side of the business, making people feel like they're welcome, that they matter, that they're, we understand them, we understand their preferences, we understand what brings them joy, expanding the sensual, like senses, smells, music, lighting, how things feel even at the table, and how we get people feeling like they're actually coming out of their, really busy days, but they go to a restaurant to just get restored and refreshed and feel like their life is back to normal again. If you think that that's what the purpose of a restaurant is, then we have a great future, right? What's going to become important, though, is in the world of automation, because everybody's going to have to go there. We're going to have to make our restaurants more efficient. We're going to have to take the liberties of all of the work that can be automated and not leave it on the table. But then we have to get better at the human connection side. And so I would say Earls has been practicing this since 2005, how to unleash people to be almost incredible empaths, not only to their guests, but inside the company, the way we treat our people, the way we talk to people, how we bring out the best in our people is becoming an art form. And I think the restaurant companies that are the best at people become the winners of this next era of what it's going to be a successful restaurant company.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that. I think it's when everyone's looking for efficiency and how can I trim down, and if you want to save money, you should invest in your people. I think that's a great way to talk about it. I definitely feel that from Earls, and I've obviously it not only taught me how to cook, but taught me how to organize my day.
Yeah.
So it was a great spot to work, and thank you so much, Mo, for joining us today. This has been awesome.
Oh, my pleasure, man.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Claudia.
So You Want to Run a Restaurant is created by Back of House, produced and hosted by Claudia Sarek, with Nick Florick as executive producer. Marketing by Hillary Young and Ashley Dunn. Creative by Manisha Kishenchand. And live production by Sarah Heemstra. And of course me, your co-host, Spencer Michael. For more information, visit backofhouse.io/podcast.